Hey chat, this is a game level I made, and I used 3 of the top models to generate 3D assets for it while having a terrible time. Now I'm going to go through everything I did so I can explain why, and maybe you'll learn something, or maybe you'll just laugh at me. Up to you really. It started like any other of my side projects. I saw a post on X about how you could use Gemini to generate these concept art things, and then you could feed it into these other tools to generate fully textured models. And I thought this would be the perfect thing to try. Larian just got into some hot water online for saying that they were going to use AI for concept images. And this is beyond concept images. This is the full thing. This is meshes and this is textures. So why not give it a shot? But first, I needed a canvas. So I opened up Unreal Engine and I chose one of the starter templates. I picked the top-down shooter. This is going to be the thing that I turned into the AAA game of my dreams. Now, it comes with some game mechanics, so it has a standard fire for your character, it has bombs that you can pick up and explode for giant AoE damage, it has enemy spawners, and it has some animations. But it's all gray boxed, it's all using the standard Unreal assets, and this is going to be the thing we're going to focus on replacing. So I went to Gemini, and I decided I would use a trick I used for a different video, which is asking it to generate a bunch of different assets all in the same picture to keep them visually consistent. I would need models for 3 things: the environment, the pickups and weapons, so the grenade and rocket in this case, and then the characters, which is the main character and the enemies. And I found 3 tools to do this. One was Microsoft Trellis, then there was Hitem3d by Tencent, and I tried Hitem3d, which is maybe a little more focused on 3D printing. I couldn't quite tell. And yes, Tencent is a gaming company. More on that later. I started off with Trellis, which is a service by Microsoft. Now, I couldn't go to any of Microsoft's services to pay them, so I went to Hugging Face instead, and I signed up for a paid account. I decided I was going to replace the blue ball representing the bomb on the levels with a grenade, and I was going to use Trellis to model it. The minimal polygon count in this playground seemed a little bit high, but I decided I would just plow ahead. And so here are the results. As you can see, it's ass. There are way too many polygons for this to be in a game. And if that's a little confusing to you, just know that the more polygons there are, the harder it is for the game engine to do anything with this game, where render it or do shadows or things like that. On top of that, there's holes everywhere, and having holes in your model also makes them look really terrible. Now, you can go into Blender to reduce the number of polygons with a tool called decimation, but now you run into other problems. You see, these tools are generating 2 things. One is the actual mesh or model, and the other one is a texture, which is a picture that's mapped onto the polygons that makes them not just a gray blob, right? You see all the lines and colors and things like that. Well, in reality, it's 3 pictures, but I'm not going to go into it that much. Just Google physical-based rendering if you want to know more. But the problem is that because the images are mapped onto the polygons, when you change the polygons around and remove a bunch of them and change the shapes of the other ones, that mapping is not so good anymore. And now you have to go in and redo it by hand, and it's really annoying. This grenade, though, is going to be pretty tiny on the screen, and I thought I could get away with not doing any of that. So I just touched up the texture a little bit, and I thought I would just shrink it down. So I exported it out of Blender, and then I tried to import it into Unreal, and it did not work. And the reason it did not work is because Trellis exports images for the textures in a way that Unreal cannot accept. I think it's because it's using WebP, but to be honest, I totally don't understand what's going on. So I had to go back into Blender and export the images by hand as PNG files. And then in Unreal, I had to construct a material using those PNG files so that I could accurately map them onto the model that I had. Minor setback, but let's keep going. Now, up next, I wanted to replace the enemies. So I loaded this robot image into Hunyuan 2.1 in Hugging Face, and then I pulled out the GLB and put it into Blender. And this time it decimated actually pretty cleanly because the robot has a lot of flat surfaces and it was really easy for the algorithm to figure out what to do. From there, I exported it and put it into Mixamo, which is an Adobe thing. And what that let me do is to rig the model with a skeleton that I could then use to animate it. After the skeleton was ready, I exported it back out, put it into Unreal, hit the Z up bug, if you know, you know, put it back into Blender, fixed the Z up orientation, put it back into Unreal, retargeted the run animation that I already had in my project, and I had a running robot enemy. From there, I took the mesh of the robot and shattered it into another static mesh collection, so you could have this fun explosion death animation. So this part went pretty well, and it was kind of fun. But then I remembered all the other posts that I saw on X that were demos of this, and they were also robots. So it seems like this technology is really good at making 3D meshes of robots based on pictures of robots. And I think that makes sense. They're all made of hard surfaces, and the surfaces are largely flat. And I think it's easier for it to model that kind of thing. Less easy for organic things or people, as we'll get to later. But it was time to move on. Despite my robot-based success, I was having a lot of trouble getting the other clutter-based and wall assets generated. Trellis was still putting big holes in everything, and Hunyuan was adding planes and floors to objects that I really didn't want extra planes or floors or backgrounds to. And on top of that, a lot of the textures it was generating were shinier than other ones. And so the models kind of looked in isolation, but when you put them into the level, they didn't really feel like they went together very well. And so the way I responded to that was just making the level darker and darker until you couldn't really tell the difference so much, and then playing with the textures to try to make them a little less reflective. And then my credits ran out. I couldn't use Hugging Face anymore. And I could not find a way to pay Hugging Face to use these playgrounds anymore either. So I was stuck. Now, at this point, some of you might say, why not use Comfy UI? Why not use Automatic? Just install PyTorch. Well, a lot of the standard workflows, especially for Comfy UI, don't actually generate textures. And I am not going to pull down a Docker image that was posted by someone in a random Reddit thread from GitHub that has 8 stars and run it on my computer. That is too much. I'm not doing it. So I signed up for a Hitem3d account. And this turned out to be the best service from an accuracy standpoint. The models were coming out much more detailed, much closer to the original image that I fed in than any other service. However, they were coming out with incredibly high polygon counts. And the way these polygons were organized in the mesh that I was getting made them very hard to decimate. It was so difficult to get them down at all without just totally ruining the mapping of the textures to the mesh. Still though, I pumped out some assets and I put them in my game. But at this point, I was really not having fun anymore. Instead of feeling like I was being creative, I felt like I was just taking these garbage things and cleaning them up as much as I could and shoving them in my game and trying not to think too hard about how they didn't quite match everything else, or how melty they looked, or how the textures were off, or how they weren't like the original image. It just didn't feel good. So I decided I was going to make the next model by myself, but I'm not really a modeler. So what I did was I decided to replace the main weapon for my character. And I decided that instead of this glowy ball, I would turn it into a rocket. So I opened up Blender and I modeled and textured this dumb rocket myself. And this was actually one of the most enjoyable parts of this whole project, is making this dumb rocket, because I felt like I was actually making the teeniest, tiniest creative choice about what it was going to be. And you can't even see it in the game because the exhaust light kind of hides it. But this was the only real upside. But I was still determined that I was going to finish this thing. And the last thing I needed to get into the game to replace all the standardized assets was the main character. And so I went back to Gemini and I fed in a bunch of the other images to give it the style I wanted for the main character, and I asked it to generate a protagonist with a rocket launcher for an arm. And here's what it gave me. Looks kind of familiar. In any case, I fed this render or this picture into all the other services. And the best one I got was this from Hitem3d at a cost of a astronomical number of polygons. And at this point, I gave up. I couldn't do it. It doesn't look like the image I put in, and I wasn't even that crazy about the image I put in. And the thought of having to import and export out of Blender multiple times to rig this thing and then retarget all the animations, I just couldn't do it. I gave up, and that was that. So what's the conclusion? Well, I think these things are not ready to generate real game assets unless you pick something that just really specifically this model is good at, but that's just kind of a roll of the dice. They might be good for blocking out certain things in a level that doesn't have real assets anymore. So if you need some kind of like big piece in there, like a giant statue, and you just want to kind of block it in and you don't care how many polygons it has or whatever, you just kind of want to get a feel for it. Maybe you'd be good at that. There's old videos of Kojima for Metal Gear Solid building out all the levels with Legos just to see how they would flow and look from a certain perspective. And maybe you could use it for something like that. But from a creative perspective of making something and trying to express an idea or a feeling you have, it's really terrible. It's all the awful things about 3D modeling, which is like the coordinate systems are not congruent across different tools, and one thing will take WebP textures and another thing will not take WebP textures, and it will just crash. And so you're dealing with all these problems, but you're not actually making anything and you don't feel like you're being creative. And so it just sucks. It's really bad. But just because it sucks now doesn't mean it's always going to suck. And it doesn't mean no one's going to use it. Like I said in the very beginning, one of these is made by Tencent. And Tencent makes a whole lot of video games. And you can bet if they find a way to use this thing to reduce the amount of time and money it takes to make something, they're going to do it. And these things are only going to get better. Are they going to get as good as a real artist? Probably not. But the nature of commercial art, which video games are, is that things just have to be good enough. So what is the takeaway? Well, I come from a programming background. And for programming, LLMs and these AIs have not gotten rid of the need for programmers, but I would be lying if I said that they haven't changed the nature of the job, for me at least. And if you are a 3D artist or kind of work in the creative space in video games, I don't think these things are going to eliminate the need for you, but they are going to change your job. And I think you should think about how they're going to change your job and how you're going to respond to it when they do. But hopefully this was interesting at least, and I'll see you in the next one.